All right, Mike, I want to have two parts to this interview. The first part about TGL and Tomorrow Sports, and the second part about how I think TGL is kind of a proxy or a way into talking about media rights and the state of sports and media more broadly. But let's start with allowing you to take your well-deserved victory lap. We're about 2 months into TGL. How do you think it's going year one?
We are very happy with how we've done so far in the first couple of months. I mean, this has been 5 years of every single day working by not just myself, a really good group of people behind us. So we're pretty happy, but a lot of it is this is what we envisioned and what we expected. And the joke with a lot of our investors when they first show up inside the arena, it's like, oh, this looks just like the pictures it did when you pitched us for the investment 5 years ago. So far so good. I mean, the idea of going to find new fans and getting a younger audience for the sport of golf. So far so good on that.
Well, what's something that has surprised you that maybe you weren't expecting or prepared for?
Yeah, look, we set out to create a young audience, but when we saw the data, the demographic data from the first couple of weeks, and this was a good TGL was a good dozen years younger than traditional golf and much more on par with some of the youngest of all the major professional sports. I think, on a median age basis, the only thing that was younger was the NBA. And for us to kind of have that much of our audience in that 18 to 49 demo that advertisers covet was really important. And frankly, I didn't think we were going to be able to get that young that quickly, but we did right out of the gate, which was really reassuring for all of us who've been working on it for so long.
Have you been satisfied with sort of the rules, the gameplay, or are you already thinking about potential tweaks for season two?
We spent years testing, rehearsing, 200 different test matches where we went through, different variations of the shot clock and timeouts. And, the whole concept was to borrow elements that are familiar to sports fans from other sports and then bring them into a golf in a way that would make sense. And a lot of it was creating an environment like this so fans would know where a shot clock goes and know where to look. And so, that piece has been great, but we've definitely iterated. We'll talk to the players, kind of see what's working. We're listening to everyone, fans included, on, what do they want to see. So we've made a few subtle tweaks here and there, and largely those have been the right calls at the right time. And I think it's also the benefit of being a startup where you can be nimble and there's not a lot of legacy that you're beholden to, and it's okay to make some changes as long as we're always kind of thinking about the fan and the product and how can we give the fans what they want more often.
So I'd imagine one of the top concerns that has to go through your mind is, look, there's initial appeal to this. Everybody wants to see the technology. Of course, everybody wants to watch Tiger Woods play. But how do you keep this going? How do you keep the ratings steady or rising after the initial appeal of seeing this wears off? So I will ask you that direct question. How do you keep it going?
We have, there's 6 teams, three players play on each team every week. 24 of the best players in the world. There's some weeks there's one match, some weeks there's been up to 4. And the reality is the kind of characters and the storylines change. So at the beginning of the season, it was definitely, a curiosity. Then it was really focused on, kind of the core star players. And then the competition started to become, I think, something that people got interested in because the players really showed their competitive spirit when they were out there. And, these are some of the most competitive people in the world. So you put them in an environment like this and they want to win.
Okay, Mike, I know in your head you must have a list of desired players for TGL. Who are some of the players that are not currently playing in the league that you'd love to have in the coming years?
Yeah, we've talked to a lot of players. A lot of them, they couldn't make it work because of the schedule. They either, they don't live in Florida, they live on the West Coast, they have a young family, they want to take a wait and see. And frankly, we've had some of those that we talked to early on. Tony Finau came in and he ended up playing. He lives on the West Coast, has a big family. He had a blast, enjoyed it. I talked to him after the match, and he was having fun. We had some others. Jason Day came and checked it out. Some of the younger stars that are now kind of up and coming and should be the stars of the future on the PGA Tour came as well and have checked it out. In addition to some LPGA players and some former Masters champions who are no longer competitive on tour, but are, so we've had a lot of people come and take a look. And I think the idea of continuing to give the fans, the global stars, kind of all around the game, fans everywhere. We're in 130 different countries, broadcast agreements. And I think the more that we can just keep all of those fans in mind. Obviously, it's a U.S. based product, but we've got a lot of other countries covered, and of course, there's going to be stars that emerge over time. But you start to look at those top players in the world, and you always want to keep a conversation going with them.
You mentioned that some of the West Coast players kind of balked at the idea of coming and playing all their matches in Florida. Are you thinking about building a second venue on the West Coast, perhaps, to expand the league and also invite some of those players who said no the first time around?
Yeah, that's definitely on the roadmap. We've started having conversations and took some site visits before the season. We'll do another series of site visits after the season where there are places that make a lot of sense for players live in certain communities on the West Coast, and the first part of our season, first part of the PGA Tour season is based on the West Coast. So creating less cross-country travel, whether it's for players who are based in Florida or for players who live on the West Coast, is definitely long-term. I mean, this projects do not go fast. I mean, it's pretty major construction projects. So the reality is that's a few years off, but you need to start on that now to make sure that that's something that can come into play in a few years.
So a question about the general business model of TGL, because you've now talked about, you've got these team owners, you have the league itself, you have a number of very big sponsors for the league. How is and then you have a media deal, which is with ESPN. I've reported that deal is for less than $10 million per season, but you will have a chance to renegotiate that deal at some point. How is the money split between the ownership and the league itself? And then I'm assuming that the team ownership money, that's the money that sort of trickles down to the players?
Yeah, if you look at it, what we set out to do, and this was at the Tomorrow Sports level, if you think about creating a version of a sport in 2025, what would it look like? It would be a lot different than most sports. They were the way they were created originally. So, live, prime time, global, true global superstars, a lot of data, a lot of moments that, both for fans and followers that are going to be meaningful for that fan who's watching live in prime time, and also the next day for that follower who's just following along on social media. You want to create an environment where there are a lot of those moments. So the idea is to try to create a version of the sport that's rooted in the history and traditions of the game, but is also taking a big step into the future. And you do that by thinking about much more about modern media consumption and what are all the attributes you put together. So what does that look like for us? It's taking what is a 4-day sunrise to sunset golf tournament and condensing it down into a 2-hour match where 2 teams enter and 1 team leaves 2 hours later, a winner. So with all that being said, you've got all of the traditional revenue streams that you would find in traditional leagues with media sponsorship. SoFi has been an incredible partner as the presenting sponsor of the league. ESPN is on board and has been fantastic as our domestic media partner. And then the team owners come in. They're a real marketing machine to the community of people that they reach every day based on their other teams that they have in those communities. So most of those revenue streams exist. It's just the costs are different because you're playing out of a centralized venue. And then there's a purse for the players that's paid out at the end of the season based on performance of the team at the end of the year.
You mentioned Tomorrow Sports. So that's the parent company of TGL.
Right.
The vision of Tomorrow Sports is beyond TGL. It's to look into the future and think about ways of modernizing sports, as far as I
Right.
understand it.
Right.
What are some other ideas that you guys are thinking about in terms of creating new sports opportunities?
Yeah, we've been pitched by a lot of sports around the world. It's not what we set out to do, but that's a lot of what people are looking at. So we're looking at ways in which we can take existing sports that have all of those attributes I listed before, live, be in prime time, real global superstars, a global sport. There can be we need a lot of data, and you need to create an environment that creates competitive moments that are compelling, that live on social media. And the reality is every sport can present, different pieces of that. And I think you think about all of those for how the fan will respond to that. And then at the same time, can you create a better commercial model, or a different commercial model that allows for the business to be sustainable for the long haul? And frankly, a lot of the formatting of what we did with TGL, taking traditional golf, and then applying some of the attributes from other sports. I mean, if you're here and you watch the match in person, or if you watch it on television, it's paced a lot more like a football game, which is from a fan experience is great, but it also allows you for the commercial opportunities where, the shot clock's important, but TV timeouts are important too, to commercialize and make sure that you can monetize the business.
So I have found TGL fascinating because I feel like it is part of this bigger media story, which is what I want to talk to you about now, where you have seen ESPN spend relatively small dollars on a property that has rated not quite as high as Major League Baseball, but in the general ballpark of a sport like Major League Baseball, and they've spent orders of magnitudes of money less. And it has made me wonder if we are entering a world where the big sports properties will gravitate toward paying a lot of money for the marquee sports that they know are going to be big hits, then take a lot smaller bets on emerging sports like women's sports or TGL, and then the bucket of sports that are in the middle, F1, Major League Baseball, NHL, may be kind of left hanging and having to accept smaller deals. And I know before you joined TGL, you ran the Golf Channel. You're extremely knowledgeable about this. I'm curious to hear your general take on that hypothesis.
Yeah, I think every sport, every league has different attributes that are probably, you can look at them as, positive and negative, from a fan standpoint, consumer standpoint, commercial standpoint. And I think the reality is today you've got the traditional revenue streams from an advertiser standpoint and from a subscriber standpoint that has only been more and more important as streaming has come along. So I think the reality is you listed a handful of sports there, and you've got, golf and soccer and motorsports all have similar attributes in that the action never really stops. Golf is unique in that it can go from sunrise to sunset. But motorsports and soccer, there's not a lot of commercial opportunities and chances to try and add your traditional advertising like you would have in football and basketball and things like that. So one of the things that we were trying to do from a Tomorrow Sports standpoint is how can we take sports that exist today, and if you're rethinking or trying to reframe them in the modern media environment, how would you not only create it more fan friendly, but how can you create it as a more commercially viable product? And one of the things that we were able to do in partnership with the PGA Tour is to create a version of this that allowed for a different type of commercialization. You can see the LED boards that you can see. You never really see this on a traditional 150, 200 acre golf course, but because we build a venue that looks a lot more like a basketball arena or a hockey arena, you're able to commercialize it in a way that's quite different than what you would be able to do from a traditional. And I think that other media deals that get done, we are trying to create a really good business for what we've set out to do and create long-term accretive value for our partners, whether that be the players, the team owners, the sponsors, and frankly, our media partner. And if we can help our media partners take the rating that they had previously in that same window, or take the same number of hours that they had previously, and improve on that, then we've done our job, and that's what they're paying us for.
I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying, because I think
Yeah.
it's actually fascinating, because your take on this, I think, is I'm not sure I've heard it before, and it makes a lot of sense to me, I think, if I'm understanding it correctly, which is that the essence of certain sports, F1, traditional golf, boxing, sports that do not have natural commercial breaks, may find themselves on streaming services that are not necessarily baked in with the same commercial breaks of traditional TV. And other sports, such as what you have crafted TGL to be, are better fits for a legacy model. And that the essence of the sport may actually dictate where these sports end up in their next iteration of media rights deals. Did I explain that correctly?
I think there are a lot of factors, and I think what streaming services provide. And if you go back in time, look at it, broadcast networks provided a broad reach, but there were limited window opportunities. Then 24-hour sports networks came on board, and there's pretty much like unlimited windowing opportunities where you could have an event that started and you may not know when it ends, but because you have a 24-hour sports network, they're going to stick with that. Whereas on a broadcast network, it's a limited window. Now on a streaming service, you have the opportunity to monetize that audience differently than you would in a much more traditional, dual revenue stream, advertising driven world. What we're trying to do is we're just trying to take the pulse of the modern sports fan today and create versions of sports. And we want to do it in collaboration and in partnership with the existing governing bodies and the existing top athletes in the world. And how can we do it in a way that's kind of complementary to that ecosystem? Every sport is not going to be the cup of tea of a certain media outlet, whether it be more traditional or linear or solely streaming. But I think the reality is we're looking at a world in which different sports may be tailored to different audiences for different reasons, and that's just the world that we're living in now. And I think from a consumer standpoint, choice is probably better than it's ever been.
Last question, Mike. Are you already talking to ESPN about potentially extending your media rights deal and maybe including some of these new hypothetical ideas, whether it's LPGA or senior golf, as a part of that new deal?
We're talking to ESPN every day about a lot of things, but right now we are focused on delivering as best we possibly can for the remainder of the TGL season, and so far so good. But we've still got a few weeks to go, and we're focused on delivering on that.
Appreciate it, Mike. Fascinating business, fascinating time in the media sports world. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it.